I attended a Catholic private middle school that would hold a fall festival every October. The festival would typically include food, live music, bouncy houses, and a corn maze. All of it was held in the recess area behind the school. The events of this story take place when I was in 8th grade. It was a small class, about 30 boys and girls. The whole class would go to the festival every year. It was on a Saturday and began at lunchtime but would last until like 10. Us older kids would arrive later. Despite the small size of this school, the festival always amassed a lot of visitors since adults, alumni, and members of the nearby church that owned the school would also attend. I went with my two friends RJ and Neil, who were probably my closest friends in that class. RJ's mom dropped us off at around 8. We mingled around with some of the guys in our class we knew and some of the 7th graders we knew, got some food, and once it got dark went to hit the corn maze, which was basically the main highlight. Only 7th graders and older were allowed to enter the corn maze since it was actually pretty huge and fairly easy to get lost in, especially in the dark. We were planning to race through it to see who could find the exit on the other end first. As soon as we got out of the corn maze, we all stopped to take a breath. Then I noticed a concerned look on Neil's face as he began frantically patting down his pockets. He started to have a mini freak out as he was telling us his phone wasn't in his pockets. RJ and I calmed him down and said it must have fallen out of his pocket as we were running through the maze. Instantly, Neil marched back in the way we had come out to try and retrace his steps. RJ and I followed behind him, but we eventually lost sight of him. We walked through the maze just laughing about how freaked out Neil was, figuring he'd find us when he found his phone. Just then we both stopped as we heard rustling in the corn to our right. It seemed there was someone moving in there. I thought it was Neil trying to scare us, but as I pushed the corn stalks aside, the noises stopped and I couldn't see anyone in there. Then I had the idea to call Neil's phone to see if he was in there messing with us. Sure enough, I could hear the sound of a phone ringing from within the corn. I could even see the light of what was undoubtedly a phone screen. I looked at RJ, and he followed behind me as I reached for the stalks the phone was behind to push them apart. But just as I reached my hand out, I felt my heart stop as someone else's hand emerged from the corn and began pushing it aside. All I did was watch as some massively tall man in all black stepped out of the corn and began approaching me with this smile on his face. He was holding Neil's phone. I heard him say one thing. "Boo." Neil grabbed my arm and we took off running back the way we came. I could hear footsteps chasing us and I began running faster. By the time we reached the exit, I ran an extra 20 feet or so away from it before I could no longer run. "Who the fuck was that?" RJ said. After catching our breath for a minute, I noticed Neil walking along some of the stands nearby. RJ and I ran over to him. I asked him if he found his phone and he said no. I told him what had happened when me and RJ were in the maze. "Holy shit, that's crazy," he said. "We gotta tell someone." We saw RJ's mom nearby, so we ran up to her and told her what happened. I don't think she believed us at first, but after convincing her we were telling the truth, she ran off to notify some employee. The three of us sat at a picnic table just processing everything that had happened and talking about it. Then RJ tugged my shoulder and said, "Look." I turned to see the man from earlier in all black walking out of the corn maze exit, all nonchalant looking. He glanced around the festival, looked over at us, gave us a small wave, and then walked away from the field and into the parking lot. He moved behind the building until we could no longer see him. RJ's mom returned with a couple of employees to search the cornfield, but at that point we all could say that we had seen him leaving. He had a hood on so we couldn't see his face. All we could say that he was probably 6'5" and Caucasian. RJ's mom took us home after that. Neil tried to use Find My iPhone to track his phone, but it had either been turned off or destroyed. He got a new one about a week after this happened. Last October, I volunteered for this nonprofit organization I found online that would grow food to distribute to poorer cities. I was doing it with my boyfriend since we both needed to log volunteer hours during our senior year. It was a cool fall night, temperature-wise, somewhere in the 60s or 70s. My boyfriend Cole picked me up and we took the freeway for about 30 minutes into the city where this place was. It was on a church's property. The church funded their organization or something like that, if I recall correctly. Anyways, Cole parked around the back of the church to the right side of it, and after looking around for a bit, we found the area we had to work at. It was on the other side of the church. We signed ourselves in and clocked around 3 hours of spreading mulch and planting seeds in the fields. Once we were done, we were the only other volunteers there other than the staff. At this point, it was somewhere close to 11 and the sun had completely set. We walked together around the back of the church to where we had parked, and as we approached the car, I noticed a black BMW parked 2 spaces away from it that had not been there earlier. The whole parking lot had been empty when we arrived, and it was still empty now apart from our car and the Beamer. As we got closer, I could hear loud rap music blasting from inside it. I also noticed the 2 front windows were rolled down a crack and smoke was billowing out from it. The windows were tinted and it was dark out, so I couldn't see anything else. Cole laughed and made some joke about how they had pulled over to hotbox the car or something. I guess neither of us found it too weird at first. But as Cole and I exited the parking lot, I noticed the car start its engine and start tailing us. When we turned right out of the parking lot, so did the car. At first I didn't say anything. The church was situated on a busy main road. It was kind of weird that he had left right after us, but I couldn't exactly say he was following us yet. Well, 20 minutes of driving and 3 turns later, that car was still behind us. Cole noticed it too and mentioned it before I did. He said he was going to take a couple of random turns to see if the guy was actually following us. Cole took 2 lefts in a row down some quieter residential street and the Beamer was still behind us. Cole told me to Google where the nearest police station was and he said he was going to drive there to get this guy off his ass. I looked it up on maps and started giving Cole directions there. We were still driving down this quiet block with no other cars and then we hit a red light. As we stopped, I noticed the Beamer aggressively swerve into the lane next to us and pull up right beside us behind the limit line. I was watching them from the passenger seat as they were directly to my right. The driver's side window and back window started rolling down. I was barely able to see 2 men wearing hoods and creepy monster masks in both seats, and the barrel of some kind of handgun being aimed at us before I was thrown back as Cole hit the gas and floored it through the red light. I watched in the rearview mirror as Cole hit 55 going down the street. We quickly lost them as we rounded a corner. After that, we drove straight to the police station and reported what happened and the make and model of the car. We couldn't give much info about the attackers themselves, however, since they were wearing masks, and like I said, the windows were tinted, so we couldn't even say if there were more than 2 men in the car or not. The woman behind the desk told us they'd dispatch a few officers to patrol the street we named and the surrounding blocks to search for the vehicle. After that, we went home. I haven't been back to that city since. I like to take my wife and 2 daughters camping every year. We typically go at the end of summer, anywhere from July to November. The events of this story occur in October 2009, which was the last year we ended up going camping in this specific park. I don't want to reveal the name of the park because I don't want this story to be traced back to me, but it was about a 3-hour drive away from where we lived and it was known for its redwood trees. Every year we always took the RV up there and would park it in the RV camping area. It was a very family-friendly area. That specific weekend of October 2009, we were up there. I noticed the RV parking area was very quiet, which was unusual. But we had never been there on that specific weekend before, so I figured it must have been a quieter weekend. There were only a few other families there. The scenery was absolutely beautiful. The trees were all turning a deep orange or yellow as we were well into the fall season at that point. The Friday night we arrived, we kind of just set up the lounge chairs outside the RV and took the girls on a hike through the area. My two daughters were 11 and 16. As we returned late that night, we got to meet the family who was set up next to us. It was a dad and his teenage son, Grant. I believe Grant was 17. They were out in front of their RV grilling hot dogs, and after my wife and I had gotten to know Grant's dad, who said his name was Randy, he invited us to bring our girls out and have dinner with them. Randy was a very nice guy. My wife and I could talk to him for hours, just drinking beer and shooting the breeze. He didn't talk much, and when he did, he spoke very dryly. The most conversation I was able to get out of him was some small talk about his school and how he played JV lacrosse or something like that. He didn't necessarily look odd though. In fact, I'd say he was a pretty good looking guy with wavy blonde hair and striking blue eyes like his dad's. The girls came out and ate a bit and drank some of their sodas, but I think they felt awkward being unable to connect with Grant, so they went back into our RV soon afterwards and Grant went back into his. My wife and I just continued sitting around the fire and talking to Randy more. He told us a lot about Grant's mom and how they were divorced and that she had custody. And the weekends he took Grant camping were the only times he got to see him. From what I could gather, Grant and his father were not at all that close. Anyways, we talked to them for about an hour, then headed back to our RV to hit the hay. That night I awoke to my eldest daughter shaking me. She was telling me that she thought someone was inside the RV. At first I told her she dreamt it, but she kept insisting she heard breathing from somewhere in the kitchen area. She was nearly crying, so I knew I'd have to take a look around to ease her mind. I moved out of the bedroom area and into the kitchen. I couldn't see anything other than the outlines of the table and cabinets, but just then I heard some movement from farther away. I reached for the light switch and flicked it on, which revealed Grant standing by the door. In a flash, I lunged towards him and shoved him against the wall, screaming obscenities and demanding him to tell me why he was in here. He just kept whispering, "Listen, listen, shh, shh." I stopped shaking him and he just looked at me and said, "There's someone in here." I just said, "What?" Just then I saw his eyes move to focus on something behind me, and he just yelled "run" and ran out the front door. I turned around to go get my wife and daughters when I saw him. There was a man standing by the kitchen table dressed in all black, and he was holding a knife. He smiled at me and said, "Party time." Then he raised the blade and jumped towards me. In reaction, I quickly dove for his feet and tackled him to the ground. He dropped the knife and I struck him across the face 3 times. At this point, my wife and daughters were both screaming and I told them to run out of the RV. Grant returned with Randy and they both helped me subdue the man as my wife called the cops. It was a horrible 15 minutes of Randy, Grant, and I holding the man down and my wife trying to calm my daughters down outside who were crying. And a giant crowd of other campers had also formed outside the RV before the police finally showed up and arrested the man. As the police put him in cuffs, Grant explained that he had been on his laptop in his RV when he had seen the man outside open a window to our RV and climb inside. He had climbed in the window as well in an effort to warn us. The police called us back the next morning to say the man was a felon who had escaped parole and had multiple charges of murder and rape. He was also apparently mentally ill in some way. Along with that, apparently his last victims were a couple who were camping in that same area. It sickens me to think that my family and I came so close to having that same fate.